The rain had not stopped since dawn. It fell in long, slow sheets that blurred the black umbrellas gathered around the fresh grave. The air smelled of wet earth, lilies, and grief. I stood there, numb, watching the coffin disappear into the mud. People around me murmured prayers, words of comfort that slid off me like raindrops off a stone. Julian was gone, or so everyone believed. I held the folded flag they'd given me, my fingers trembling. 40 years of marriage reduced to this rectangle of cloth and a few hollow condolences. When the pastor whispered, "Ashes to ashes, dust to dust," I felt my knees weaken. Then my phone buzzed. A single vibration in my purse, sharp, out of place in that solemn silence. I thought it must be Daniel, my eldest, asking if I was okay. But when I took it out and looked at the screen, my breath froze. A message. From Julian's number. The same one I had kept, though it had been disconnected after the hospital pronounced him dead. The text read, "I'm alive. Don't trust our sons." For a few seconds I simply stared, certain my grief had made me hallucinate. Then the letters stayed steady, glowing pale blue in the drizzle. My pulse hammered in my throat. The umbrella slipped from my hand, rain soaking my hair and shoulders, but I didn't feel it. I looked around. No one seemed to notice. The pastor kept speaking. Daniel had his arm around his wife Allison, and our younger son, Michael, was staring blankly at the casket. They looked the part of grieving sons. Too perfectly, I wanted to scream, how could this be? Julian had been declared dead 3 days ago, cardiac arrest after a short stay in the hospital. I had seen his body. I had touched his cold hand. I had watched them close the coffin. Yet here it was, his number, his name, his words. "Don't trust our sons," the message pulsed again. One more line appeared. "They're lying to you." My vision blurred. The phone slipped from my hand and hit the wet grass. I picked it up quickly, terrified someone might have seen. Nobody looked my way. Everyone's eyes were on the grave, on the man who, according to the world, was dead. My husband. Inside my chest, my heart was beating like a trapped bird. If Julian was alive, where was he? And why would he say something so horrifying about our children? I kept the phone tight in my hand throughout the funeral. When the last prayer ended and guests started leaving, Daniel approached me. His suit was immaculate, black tie perfectly knotted. He placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, eyes glistening with well-practiced sorrow. "Mom," he said softly, "you shouldn't stay here in the rain. Come on, let's get you home." I nodded mechanically. But inside, everything felt wrong. He wasn't crying. He wasn't even shivering in the cold. And when he hugged me, I smelled something strange. Expensive cologne mixed with disinfectant. At home, the living room was filled with sympathy flowers. White lilies, carnations, and those dreadful with deepest condolences cards. Daniel poured me a cup of tea, his movements deliberate, almost rehearsed. Michael sat quietly near the fireplace, scrolling on his phone. Neither of them looked broken. They looked waiting. I excused myself and went upstairs, saying I needed rest. The first thing I did was lock my bedroom door and check the phone again. The message thread still glowed on the screen. 2 messages, both from Julian's number. The contact photo, his smile taken 2 years ago on our anniversary trip. It felt unreal. My hands trembled as I typed back, "Who is this? Is this some kind of cruel joke?" The reply came instantly. "No joke. They poisoned me." My throat went dry. I could barely breathe. The words swam before my eyes. Poisoned? By our sons? It couldn't be. Julian had been ill, yes. Complained of stomach pains for weeks. But the doctor said heart failure. No sign of poison. Another message arrived. They used methanol. In my whiskey. I dropped the phone on the bed. My knees buckled and I sat down, shaking from head to toe. Methanol. The same thing used in industrial alcohol, not meant for drinking. Deadly even in small doses. I whispered, "No, no, no." This had to be madness. Maybe someone hacked his phone. Maybe this was a scam. Yet deep inside, a whisper answered back. You know your sons. You've seen their greed. Memories flooded me. Daniel pressuring his father to sign the new insurance policy last year. Michael insisting we sell the old lake house for convenience. Their arguments about inheritance, money, property. Julian had always brushed it off, saying, "They're just ambitious, Juliet." Another ping. They forged documents, life insurance in my name. Check the safe. I froze. The safe in Julian's study. I hadn't opened it since his death. The key was still on his old keychain, which Daniel had returned after the hospital. Heart pounding, I tiptoed across the hallway to the study. The room smelled faintly of cigar smoke and old leather. Everything was just as he'd left it. Desk, chair, bookshelf full of travel journals. I knelt in front of the safe, inserted the small brass key, and turned it. It opened with a soft click. Inside were papers, envelopes, and a black USB drive. On top sat a folder labeled Insurance. I opened it. There it was, a copy of a life insurance policy worth $2 million. Beneficiaries, Daniel and Michael Roberts. Not me, my pulse quickened. I flipped through the pages and my stomach turned. The signature line, Julian's name, but something about it looked off. The slant, the spacing, forged. A note was clipped to the back, written in Julian's careful handwriting. Juliet, if anything happens to me, call Detective Harris. Folder C3. The handwriting was unmistakably his. Tears filled my eyes. He had known. He had tried to warn me. I searched the drawers, and in the back of one I found a manila envelope marked C3. Inside, photos, receipts, and a flash drive labeled Evidence. Photos of Daniel at the insurance office. Copies of emails to an agent. A text printout. Make sure she doesn't know about this yet. My stomach twisted. I wanted to throw up. Our sons. Our own flesh and blood. Just then, a knock on the door. Mom? Daniel's voice. You okay in there? I shoved the papers back into the safe, locked it, and stood. Yes, sweetheart, I managed, forcing my voice steady. Just looking for Dad's watch. A pause. Then his footsteps retreated down the hall. I exhaled shakily, tears spilling down my cheeks. If Julian truly was alive somewhere, I had to find him. If he wasn't, then someone had used his phone, and that someone knew too much. That night I couldn't sleep. The rain kept tapping on the windows like restless fingers. Every creak of the house made my heart jump. At 2 a.m., I went back to the study, plugged in the USB drive to Julian's laptop, and opened the single file inside. It was a video. Julian sat in his office, pale but alive, speaking directly to the camera. Juliet, if you're watching this, it means I didn't make it. Or they made sure I wouldn't. His voice trembled. I've been feeling sick for weeks. The doctors can't explain it. I think Daniel is adding something to my drink. He took a deep breath. I have hidden a copy of all the documents with someone I trust. Don't confront them. Call Detective Harris. I paused the video, hand over my mouth, silent sobs shaking me. My husband had predicted his death. He had left me breadcrumbs to find the truth. And the worst part, he hadn't trusted our own children. Outside, the storm raged harder. Lightning flashed, illuminating the room in brief silver bursts. I felt watched, though I was alone. Then, footsteps downstairs, slow, heavy, the creak of the back door. My pulse raced. I shut the laptop, grabbed the USB, and hurried to the closet, pressing myself against the coats. The sound grew louder. A whisper, Michael's voice. She's awake? Then Daniel's reply, cold, low. Doesn't matter. Tomorrow we'll handle it. Handle what? My fingers clenched around the USB so tight, it left marks on my palm. I stayed hidden until the house went quiet again. When I finally crept out, the clock read 3:27 a.m. I sat at the desk and whispered to myself, Julian. I'll find the truth, I promise. The morning after the storm, the house felt colder than usual. Even with the heater running, The air carried a chill that had nothing to do with temperature. It was the chill of mistrust. I moved quietly, pretending everything was normal. In the mirror, my reflection looked older, harder. I had aged years overnight. Daniel and Michael were already in the kitchen when I came down. Daniel was scrolling through emails, wearing his reading glasses. Michael was watching the news, pretending to care about politics. I forced a small smile. "Morning. Morning, Mom," Daniel said without looking up. "Did you sleep at all?" Michael asked, sipping his coffee. "I tried." He nodded and gave a sympathetic smile that didn't reach his eyes. I noticed something strange. 2 coffee cups on the counter, one half full, one still steaming. Daniel had poured both, but only drank from one. I glanced at the untouched cup. It was mine, and suddenly my stomach twisted. Julian's words echoed in my head. "They're poisoning me." Daniel slid the cup toward me. "You need to keep your strength, Mom." I stared at it for a moment too long, then smiled weakly. "Thank you, honey. I'll have it later." I placed it aside, my fingers trembling slightly. He gave me a curious look. "You sure? You look pale." "I just need to eat first," I said quickly, grabbing a piece of toast. Inside, I was screaming. Every movement felt like acting for my own survival. They talked about insurance, funeral bills, estate transfers, normal adult topics, but every word sounded rehearsed. Daniel mentioned how complicated the paperwork was. "I might need to handle most of it myself," he said casually, "so you don't get overwhelmed." Michael nodded. "Yeah, Mom, we'll take care of everything. You just rest." I smiled again, the same empty smile I'd worn for decades when I didn't want to argue. But inside, something new had begun to stir. Not fear, not grief, anger. After breakfast, I slipped into Julian's old office again. I wanted to find out more about this Detective Harris. There had to be a number, an address, something. Inside the C3 folder, among the papers, I found a small business card. Detective Alan Harris, Private Investigations, San Antonio. A phone number beneath. I dialed with shaking hands. It rang twice before a calm male voice answered. "Harris Investigations." "Mr. Harris," I said quietly. "My name is Juliet Roberts. My husband, Julian Roberts, left me a message asking me to contact you." A pause. Then, "Mrs. Roberts, I've been waiting for your call." His voice was steady, professional, but there was something in it, a hint of sorrow. "You knew my husband?" "Yes, ma'am. He hired me about 3 weeks before his passing. He was concerned about someone trying to harm him." I swallowed hard. "Did he tell you who?" "He suspected his sons," Harris said softly. "He didn't want to believe it, but he found too many signs, financial transfers, hidden policies, phone records." My breath hitched. "So it's true?" "I can't confirm without full investigation," he replied. "But I have copies of what he gave me. If you're ready, I can meet you today." "Where?" "There's a small cafe near the courthouse, Linden Street Cafe, noon." We agreed, and I hung up. The phone felt heavy in my hand. Julian had been so close to uncovering the truth, and now the burden had passed to me. I went upstairs, packed Julian's documents into my purse, and slipped out while Daniel and Michael were in the garage. The drive to the cafe felt endless. Clouds still hung low, gray and swollen, but no rain fell. It was the kind of sky that held its breath before another storm. When I arrived, the cafe was half empty. Warm light glowed from vintage lamps. A few people worked on laptops, sipping lattes. In the far corner, a man in a beige coat stood and raised a hand when he saw me. He was in his 50s, tall, calm eyes that seemed to study everything without judgment. "Mrs. Roberts," he said, shaking my hand. "I'm Detective Harris." He gestured for me to sit. "I'm sorry we're meeting under such circumstances." I opened my purse and slid the folder toward him. "I found these in my husband's safe." "He said to call you." He nodded, already flipping through the pages. Yes, these match the copies he gave me. He was collecting evidence. He suspected your sons had taken out a fraudulent life insurance policy. I stared at the table. They told me it was for security in case something happened to us. I believe that's what they told him too, Harris said gently. But the signatures don't match, and there's a large bank transfer made the day after the policy was approved. He took out a tablet and showed me screenshots of transactions. $50,000 moved into an account under Michael's name, 2 weeks before your husband's death. The cafe noise faded. My breath slowed. It was real. All of it, I whispered. Why would they do this? They're his children, Harris sighed. I've seen it too many times, Mrs. Roberts. Money makes monsters out of family. He leaned forward. If you want, I can reopen this quietly, but we'll need to be careful. If they suspect you know, they could panic or worse. I nodded numbly. I understand. He handed me a small recorder. Keep this on you at all times. If they mention money, insurance, or your husband's death, record it, I agreed. Before leaving, he said, one more thing. Your husband mentioned in his notes that someone else in your family might be helping them. I froze. Who? He didn't write the name. Only initials. A.R. My blood ran cold. A.R. Allison Roberts. My daughter-in-law, Daniel's wife. I left the cafe in a daze. The city felt unreal. Cars passing, people laughing, as if the world didn't just tilt beneath my feet. Allison. Sweet, quiet Allison, who baked cookies for the holidays and called me Mom. Could she be part of this? When I arrived home, her car was already in the driveway. She was sitting on the porch, smiling brightly. Hi, Mom. I just wanted to check on you. Her voice was soft, warm, almost too warm. I forced a smile. That's kind of you, dear. She hugged me. Her perfume was expensive, floral, the same scent I'd smelled in Julian's car that awful night. I almost gasped. She pulled back, still smiling. You look tired. How are you holding up? I'm fine, I lied. She brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. Daniel told me you were going through Dad's old stuff. Try not to stress yourself, okay? There was something behind her tone, something sharp under the sweetness. I nodded and stepped inside. As she followed, her heels clicked on the hardwood like slow ticks of a clock. In the kitchen, Daniel was on the phone, whispering. When he saw me, he ended the call too quickly. That night, I turned the recorder on and kept it hidden in my pocket. During dinner, the conversation started casual, then shifted. So, Mom, Daniel said, about the estate. The insurance payout will be processed soon. Michael and I will make sure you're comfortable, I asked softly. And what about the bakery? It was in Dad's name. He smiled. We'll handle it. It's better if you don't worry about finances. Allison reached over, touching my hand. You've done enough, Mom. Let us take care of it. Her hand was cold. My heart pounded so loudly I thought they might hear it. I excused myself soon after. In my room, I replayed the recording. Their voices clear as day, full of false comfort, carefully chosen words about money and control. It wasn't proof yet, but it was a start. The next morning, I sent the audio file to Detective Harris. He called within minutes. This is good, Mrs. Roberts. Subtle, but enough to show intent. Keep collecting. Don't let them know. Days passed like that. Quiet observation, careful words, hidden recorder. Each night I reviewed the tapes, listening to my sons discuss bank accounts, property transfers, even Julian's pension. The more I heard, the more a cold hatred took root inside me. Then, one afternoon, something happened that made my blood freeze. I went to the attic looking for old family albums. In a box labeled Dad's Tools, I found a plastic bag filled with pill bottles and syringes. The labels had been scraped off. Inside one was a clear liquid, no smell, no color. A note was stuck to the bottom of the box. Dispose carefully. Don't leave traces. I took photos and sent them to Harris. He replied within minutes. That's methanol. Don't touch anything. I'll send someone. I hid the box back in place just as footsteps came up the stairs. Daniel appeared, smiling too wide. What are you doing up here, Mom? Just old photos, I said, keeping my voice steady. Be careful, he said, glancing at the box. Some of that stuff's dangerous. He knew. He absolutely knew. That night I barely slept. The rain had returned, tapping the roof in relentless rhythm. Somewhere downstairs the refrigerator hummed, the clock ticked, and the truth pulsed in my chest like a second heartbeat. My husband was gone, my sons were strangers, and my home was no longer safe. I whispered into the darkness, Julian, I won't stop. Not until they pay for what they did. That night I couldn't close my eyes. The rain kept whispering against the windows, a sound that used to calm me, but now felt like fingers tapping on glass, warning me of something worse to come. Every creak of the old house felt alive, as if it, too, knew the secret that had poisoned our family. By dawn, I had already made up my mind. I couldn't just sit there waiting for justice. If Julian's death was no accident, then my sons had crossed a line I could never forgive. And if Allison had helped them, she was going to face me, too. I sat at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee untouched in front of me, watching the sky turn from gray to pale blue. Daniel and Michael came downstairs one by one, yawning, stretching, pretending to be ordinary men starting an ordinary day. But I saw them differently now. I saw the quiet coordination between them, the small glances, the shared silence that used to mean brotherly understanding. Now it felt like conspiracy. Michael grabbed a banana and mumbled, "Going to the office." Daniel kissed Allison on the cheek, told her he'd be back late. Their routines were predictable, mechanical, and that predictability gave me power. When they left, I locked the door behind them and went straight to the attic. The methanol bottles were still there. I took the bag and put it in a small cooler, sealing it tight. Then I drove straight to Detective Harris's office. He looked up in surprise when I walked in. "Mrs. Roberts, you shouldn't have brought this yourself." "I couldn't risk anyone following your man," I said. He nodded, taking the cooler carefully. "I'll send it to the lab today. If this matches what was found in your husband's system, we'll have hard evidence." He paused, studying my face. "You need to be careful. Once they realize you could be in danger." I smiled weakly. "I've been in danger for months, Mr. Harris. I just didn't see it before." He sighed, then opened his drawer and pulled out a small black device. "This is a tracker. I'm putting it on your car. If anything happens, I'll know where you are. And one more thing." He handed me an envelope. "There's a voice-activated recorder inside. You wear it like a pendant. It looks like jewelry. When I put it around my neck, it almost felt comforting, like armor." I left his office feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks. Control. That afternoon, Allison came over again, carrying a casserole dish, her face painted with sweetness. "Homemade lasagna," she said cheerfully. "Thought you might not feel like cooking." I thanked her and invited her in. She sat at the table, crossing her legs, her eyes darting around the kitchen like she was looking for something, maybe making sure I hadn't found what they'd hidden. "So," I said casually, "Daniel's been working late a lot lately." She laughed nervously. "Yeah, they've got a lot going on. Big clients, you know." "Of course," I said, my tone light. "And you? You look tired." She blinked. "Oh, just busy. Taking care of Daniel's mom is a full-time job." That last part stung, but I kept my expression soft. "Is that so?" She smiled sweetly. "You know I love you, Mom. We all just want what's best for you." Her words had the texture of poison coated in sugar. I reached over, placing my hand on hers. "I know you do, dear." But as soon as she left, I checked the recorder. Every word, every laugh, every calculated pause was there. That night, I called Harris. "She's part of it," I whispered. "I figured," he replied grimly. "We'll get all three. But we have to wait for the lab results before we move. Waiting was the hardest part. Every moment in that house felt like walking through a minefield. One wrong look, one wrong question, and they'd know. 3 days later, I got a call from Harris. "Mrs. Roberts," he said, "the test results are in. The methanol we found matches the compound in your husband's toxicology report. It's murder." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Murder. My sons. The words didn't belong together, but there they were. "Now we build the case," Harris continued. "We need them on record admitting intent or discussing it. Once we have that, I'll take it straight to the DA." I hung up and stared at the family photo on the wall, the last Christmas we'd taken together. Julian smiling, his arms around me, Daniel and Michael laughing in matching sweaters. And Allison, standing slightly apart, her eyes already distant. I whispered to the photo, "Don't worry, Julian. I'll finish what you started." That night I hosted dinner, just the 4 of us. I made Julian's favorite meal, roast beef, red wine, mashed potatoes. They came, cheerful, unsuspecting. Allison even brought dessert, strawberry cheesecake. "Dad used to love this," she said, smiling. "Yes," I said softly. "He did." We sat, talked, ate. The conversation was light at first, full of meaningless chatter about work and neighbors. Then I steered it gently. "You know," I said, setting my fork down, "the detective called me today." Daniel froze mid-bite. Michael looked up sharply. Allison's hand twitched near her glass. "Oh?" Daniel asked, forcing a laugh. "Why would a detective call you?" "He said they're reopening Julian's case. Something about inconsistencies in the toxicology report." The silence that followed was almost theatrical. Allison was the first to recover. "Oh, I'm sure it's just routine," she said, her voice a little too high. "Maybe," I said, smiling faintly. "He also mentioned he'd be talking to family members." Daniel's jaw tightened. "That's ridiculous. Dad was sick. It was natural causes." "Was he?" I asked softly. Our eyes met. For the first time, I saw fear flicker there. After they left that night, I sat alone in the dim kitchen, the recorder heavy around my neck. I played it back, every hesitation, every nervous breath captured. But I needed more, something undeniable. The next day, I set my plan in motion. I told Daniel I wanted to visit Julian's grave together. He agreed immediately, almost too eagerly. Maybe he wanted to keep an eye on me. We drove in silence, the cemetery quiet and cold under a cloudy sky. As we stood before the headstone, I whispered, "You know, your father used to say he wanted to rest in peace." Daniel nodded stiffly. "Of course. But I don't think he can," I said, looking at him. "Not until the truth comes out." He turned sharply. "Mom, what are you talking about?" "About what you and Michael did," I said calmly. "About the methanol." His face drained of color. "You're confused." "No," I said, stepping closer. "I found it. The bottles, the syringes." "You killed him!" He backed away, glancing around the empty graveyard. "Stop it! You don't know what you're saying." "I know everything," I said, my voice low, deliberate, the recorder in my pocket blinking red. "Even about the insurance money." He clenched his fists. "You shouldn't have gone through our things." "I shouldn't have trusted you," I whispered. That was my only mistake. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. Then he turned and walked toward the car. "Get in," he said, his voice cold. "We're going home." The drive was silent. Halfway there, my phone buzzed. A message from Harris. "Got the recording?" "Leave the house now," my heart pounded. But Daniel's eyes were on the road, his jaw tight. He didn't know I'd sent the recording live to Harris's system. Every word had been transmitted the moment I spoke. When we got home, Michael was waiting on the porch. He looked nervous, almost pale. "What happened?" he asked. "Nothing," Daniel muttered, brushing past him. "Mom's?" Confused. They went into the study, closing the door behind them. I pressed my ear to the wall. Their voices were hushed, but frantic. "She knows," Daniel said. "She found the methanol. Are you sure?" Michael's voice shook. "She confronted me at the cemetery." "Then we can't wait any longer," Michael said. "Tonight. We do it tonight," I froze. My blood ran cold. They were going to finish what they started. Quietly, I crept to the back door and slipped outside. The night air hit me like ice. I ran to my car, hands trembling, and called Harris. He answered on the first ring. "I heard," he said quickly. "Stay in your car. My team's on the way." Within minutes, flashing lights cut through the darkness. 2 patrol cars pulled up, sirens silent but lights spinning red and blue. I watched as officers stormed into my house. Through the window, I saw Daniel and Michael standing frozen, pale as ghosts. They were handcuffed within minutes. Allison stood behind them, crying, or pretending to. But I could see it in her eyes. Guilt. Harris came over to my car, opened the door, and knelt beside me. "It's over, Mrs. Roberts," he said softly. "They confessed. We got it all on tape." I covered my mouth, shaking. Tears spilled down my face, not from sadness, but from relief. 40 years of family, 1 life of lies, and finally, justice. When they drove away with my sons in the back of the police car, I felt nothing. No rage, no satisfaction, just silence. A silence that felt different this time, clean, final. Harris stood beside me. "You did good, Juliet." I looked up at the house, my voice barely a whisper. I did what I had to. The next morning the sun rose clear for the first time in weeks. I stood on the porch with my coffee, watching light spill across the garden Julian had planted years ago. The wind carried the faint scent of roses. Somewhere I imagined he was watching, proud, at peace. I closed my eyes and whispered, "Rest now, my love. I've kept my promise." The news spread faster than I could breathe. By sunrise, the entire town knew that Daniel and Michael Roberts had been arrested for the suspected murder of their father, Julian Roberts. Neighbors stood in clusters by their driveways, whispering, watching the flashing police lights disappear down our street. They looked at me through half-drawn curtains, the grieving mother who had just turned her sons in. But they didn't know the whole story. They didn't know the years of silence, the little betrayals, the slow corrosion of love that had led us here. Inside the house, it was quiet again. Too quiet. The chairs still pushed back from dinner, plates untouched, the smell of roast beef lingering like a ghost. Allison's handbag sat on the counter where she'd dropped it in the chaos, a lipstick smeared on the edge of a napkin beside it. I stared at it for a long time, my hands trembling, before finally calling Harris. He answered immediately. "We have them in custody. They've both lawyered up, but the recordings are solid. You did everything right." I swallowed hard. "And Allison?" "She's being questioned. She's not under arrest yet, but we'll get there." His tone softened. "Get some rest, Mrs. Roberts. The DA's office will call you soon." Rest. The word felt like an insult. How does a mother rest, knowing her own sons plotted her husband's death? I sat by the window all night, watching the garden shift from black to gray to gold as morning broke. For the first time in months, sunlight reached the house, but it didn't warm me. It only showed me everything that had been broken. A week later, I was called to testify before the grand jury. I wore Julian's favorite blue scarf, the one he had bought me on our trip to New Orleans 30 years ago. It smelled faintly of lavender. I didn't cry when I took the stand. I had cried enough. I told them the truth, every painful detail, the methanol bottles, the recordings, the insurance policy, the night my sons planned to finish it. When I was done, the courtroom was silent. Not a sound, not even a cough. Just the weight of truth pressing down on everyone. The prosecutor nodded, his voice calm but firm. "Thank you, Mrs. Roberts. You've been very brave." Brave, another word that didn't fit. I wasn't brave. I was broken, but too angry to stop moving. Afterward, I walked out into the hallway, the marble floor gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Detective Harris was waiting there. "You did good," he said quietly. "They'll indict both sons. And Allison? She's next." I looked at him surprised. "They found something?" He nodded. "Phone records. She was in contact with the insurance broker. She moved money from Daniel's account to hers 2 days before the murder." I felt a strange calm wash over me. I had expected heartbreak. Instead, I felt closure, cold and clean. The trial began 2 months later. The courthouse was packed every day. Reporters, neighbors, strangers who loved a good scandal. The media called it the Roberts family betrayal case, a tragedy dressed as entertainment. On the first day, I walked past cameras and microphones, ignoring the questions that flew like arrows. "Mrs. Roberts, did you know your sons were capable of this? Do you forgive them?" I said nothing, because what could forgiveness possibly mean now? Inside the courtroom, Daniel sat on one side, Michael on the other. They looked older, thinner, their faces pale under the harsh lights. When Daniel's eyes met mine, I saw fear. Not regret, just fear. Michael couldn't even look up, and then Allison walked in. Perfectly composed, her hair tied back, her face expressionless. She took the stand 2 days later, her voice steady, her lies rehearsed. "They loved their father," she said. "This is all a misunderstanding. Mrs. Roberts has been under stress." She even managed a tear. The crowd murmured, but I didn't look away. I watched her until she finally glanced my way, and for the first time she flinched, because she knew I wasn't broken anymore. When Harris was called, he played the recordings, every whispered plan, every confession, the conversation at the grave. Daniel's voice echoed through the courtroom. "She knows. She found the methanol." Michael's reply, "Then we can't wait any longer." The words hung in the air like a noose tightening. Allison's composure cracked then. Her hand shook. Her attorney whispered frantically, but it was too late. The jury had seen it. The DA had seen it. Everyone saw the truth written all over her face. After 3 weeks of testimony, the verdict came down. Daniel and Michael, guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit fraud. Allison, guilty of accessory to murder and financial fraud. Life sentences for the boys, 20 years for her. When the judge read the verdict, I didn't move. I didn't cry, didn't sigh. The only sound was Allison's quiet sob and Daniel's desperate voice saying, "Mom, please." I didn't mean for it to happen like this. I stood and looked at them one last time. "You killed your father," I said softly. "And now you've killed what little love I had left." The guards led them away. Their footsteps faded down the hall, and just like that, 40 years of family disappeared into an echo of chains and doors closing. Weeks passed. The media eventually moved on. The house grew quiet again, but this time it was peaceful, not hollow. I reopened the bakery. The first morning I walked in, the familiar scent of flour and sugar wrapped around me like an old friend. Customers trickled back, kind faces whispering condolences, buying pastries, pretending not to stare. I smiled and told them I was fine, and for the first time in a long time, it wasn't a lie. Every afternoon, I went to the cemetery. I brought fresh roses and sat by Julian's grave, reading aloud from his favorite book. Sometimes I told him about my day. Sometimes I just sat there in silence. It was the only place where my heart felt steady. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in bruised pinks and gold, I heard footsteps behind me. It was Harris. He smiled faintly, hands in his pockets. "Didn't think I'd find you here," he said. "Where else would I be?" I replied. He nodded, kneeling beside the grave. "We closed the case officially today. The DA's office wanted me to tell you personally." "Thank you," I said. He hesitated, then handed me a small sealed envelope. "This was found in Allison's safe deposit box. It's addressed to you. My stomach tightened as I took it. The handwriting was neat, careful, hers. I opened it slowly. Inside was a single page. The words were shaky, written in blue ink. Mrs. Roberts, I know there's no forgiveness for what we did. I love Julian too. Not the way you think, but because he was the only one who ever listened to me. Daniel and Michael were obsessed with the money. I just wanted out. I never meant for him to die. I never thought they'd go that far. I'm sorry. I know sorry isn't enough. I folded the letter, feeling a strange, hollow ache. Allison's confession didn't erase the past, but it gave me something. Understanding. Maybe even a sliver of peace. Harris stood. You did what no one else could have done. You fought for the truth. I smiled faintly. I just followed what my heart already knew. He tipped his hat and walked away, leaving me with the quiet hum of the evening wind. As the light faded, I traced Julian's name on the headstone. The stone was cool beneath my fingers, smooth, unyielding. I kept my promise, I whispered again. And I'm free now, my love. Truly free, I stayed there until the first stars appeared. The world around me was calm again. Not perfect, not unscarred, but calm. The pain hadn't vanished, but it had transformed into something else, something quieter. Like a tide pulling back after a long, violent storm. When I finally drove home, I left the window open. The wind drifted through the curtains, carrying the scent of rain and roses. The old clock ticked steadily in the living room, no longer an accusation, but a reminder that time keeps moving, no matter what we lose. Before going to bed, I poured myself a glass of wine, Julian's favorite Cabernet. I raised it toward the photo of him on the mantel. To the truth, I said softly, and to peace. The glass clinked gently as I set it down, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I slept, dreamless, weightless, unafraid. It had been 6 months since the verdict. The seasons had shifted. The leaves in the garden were turning gold again, and the house, once filled with echoes of shouting, lies, and heartbreak, was quiet, almost serene. Some mornings I woke up and forgot for a moment that I was alone. I would make 2 cups of coffee, just like I used to, before realizing there was no one else to drink it. But then I'd smile, pour the second cup down the sink, and whisper, "Old habits die harder than love." The bakery had become my sanctuary. Every morning before the sun rose, I tied my apron, rolled the dough, and lost myself in the rhythm of creation. The smell of bread baking, the hum of the ovens, the light clinking of trays, they became the heartbeat of my new life. Customers would come in, smiling shyly, pretending not to know who I was. They always said, "Your pastries taste like home," and I'd smile, thinking maybe that's what healing tastes like. Simple, warm, honest. Sometimes I'd see Daniel and Michael's faces in the papers when an article about the case resurfaced. The photos showed them in orange jumpsuits, their eyes hollow, their shoulders slumped. People would whisper, how could they do that to their mother? But I never answered those questions, because I still didn't have an answer myself. Some nights, I'd dream of them as little boys again. Daniel chasing fireflies in the yard, Michael falling asleep in Julian's lap during Sunday movies. In those dreams, they were innocent, untouched by greed. And I'd wake up with tears on my pillow, not of anger anymore, but of mourning. Mourning the family that once was. It was a rainy Thursday when I received the first letter. It was from Michael. The handwriting was shaky, as if he'd struggled to keep his hand steady. I hesitated before opening it, afraid of what words could do after everything that had been said. But curiosity won. "Mom," the letter began, "I don't know how to start. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect you to read this. But I need you to know that I remember everything. The bakery, the Sunday lunches, Dad teaching me to drive. I don't know when I became this person. I think I just wanted him gone because I thought he'd taken everything from me. But now, every night, I realize I took everything from myself. I'm sorry. The paper was stained at the corner, maybe with tears, maybe with regret. I folded it gently and placed it in Julian's old cigar box, the one where he used to keep our family photos. A week later, Daniel's letter arrived. His was shorter, colder. Mom, I can't undo what I did. I'm paying for it every day. I don't blame you for turning us in. You did what was right. Maybe that's what love really is, not protecting us, but saving what little truth was left. I placed his letter next to Michael's. Then I sat there, staring at the two envelopes, realizing that even monsters can sound human when they've lost everything. The following month, a woman came into the bakery. She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her at first. Then she said softly, "Mrs. Roberts, I'm Allison's sister." Her name was Claire. She held a small envelope in her hands, her eyes glistening. "She asked me to give you this," she said. "She's been transferred to a facility upstate. She said it's important." After she left, I stood in the quiet bakery for a long time before finally opening the letter. Inside, written in neat cursive, were just a few lines. "Juliet, there's something you never knew. Julian didn't plan to cheat. He was trying to protect you. The money, the insurance, it wasn't for him or for me. It was for you. He knew Daniel was stealing from the bakery accounts. He was trying to fix it quietly so you'd never find out. He met me because I worked at the insurance firm. I fell for him. He didn't for me. He wanted to save his marriage. He told me he still loved you. That night, the night he died, he was coming home to tell you everything. Please believe that." The room seemed to tilt. My chest tightened. I sat down on the floor, the letter trembling in my hand. All those years of suspicion, all that anger, the sleepless nights replaying the moments I thought he'd betrayed me. It was all wrong. Julian hadn't lied. He had been trying to protect me, and my sons, blinded by greed, had destroyed the only man who ever truly loved me. I wept until my body ached. But this time, the tears were different. Not of pain, but of release. I whispered to the empty air, "Julian, I'm sorry. I didn't know." Later that night, I walked to his grave again. The rain had just stopped and the earth smelled fresh, alive. I laid the letter on the stone, letting the breeze lift its corner. "I finally understand," I said softly. "I know you weren't the villain. You were the only one who stayed true." A soft wind brushed my hair, and for a fleeting second, I swore I heard his voice, warm, tender, full of love. "You found me, Juliet. That's all that matters." In the months that followed, I began to write, not for the world, not for fame, but for myself. I wrote about love, betrayal, survival, and forgiveness. Stories that came from the cracks of my heart. Stories of women who found their strength in ruins. People started reading them online, sending me messages. "Your stories heal." And I smiled, realizing I had found my purpose again, to turn pain into words, to give voice to the voiceless hearts. A year passed. The house no longer felt haunted. The clocks ticked softly. The walls held only silence, not secrets. Every Sunday I baked 2 loaves of bread, one for me, one for Julian. I'd leave his on the windowsill, the way he used to love it, warm with butter. Maybe it was silly, but it felt like he was still here, somehow. On our anniversary, I drove to the beach, the same one where we danced barefoot 40 years ago. The waves whispered. The wind carried the faint scent of salt and memory. I sat on the sand, closed my eyes, and imagined his hand in mine again. And for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring, because I knew, no matter how cruel the world had been, love had outlived death, lies, and pain. As the sun set, painting the horizon with fire and gold, I whispered one last promise into the wind. "Julian, I'll keep telling our story, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. The tide rose, touching my feet, cold but comforting. The day faded into twilight, and I walked back toward the road, my shadow long behind me, stretching into the dark. But this time it didn't follow me. It stayed there, by the ocean, by the man I'd loved, by the life we'd built. And as I turned back one last time, the moon broke through the clouds, bathing the water in silver light. It felt like a blessing. At that moment, I knew the story wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about rebirth. And sometimes, to find peace, you have to lose everything that wants to find you. I smiled, took a deep breath, and whispered, "My name is Juliet Roberts, and this is not the end of my story." The first time a stranger recognized me from my writing, I almost dropped the basket of muffins I was carrying. It was a gray morning, and the little bell over the bakery door chimed as a young woman stepped inside. She looked nervous, her hands clutching a folded piece of paper. "Are you Juliet Roberts?" she asked. Her voice trembled the way mine used to when life still scared me. "Yes," I said, smiling softly. She unfolded the paper. It was one of my online stories, printed out, creased at the edges, words underlined in blue pen. "This one," she whispered, "helped me leave my husband." I just wanted to say thank you. I didn't know what to say. For so long I had felt like my words belonged only to ghosts and pain. Now they belonged to someone who was still living. When she left, the bell jingled again and the bakery felt warmer. For the first time in years, I laughed out loud. By spring, my stories had spread far beyond our town. A local newspaper ran a feature called Echoes of Emotion, The Widow Who Turned Pain into Art. The title made me blush, but it also made me realize something profound. I was no longer defined by what I had lost. I was defined by what I was creating. Then one afternoon, I received a call from a man who introduced himself as David Keene, a journalist from Chicago. He sounded nervous but polite. "Mrs. Roberts, I've been researching your husband's case. I think there's something you need to see." My heart tightened. "Is this about the trial?" I asked. "Not exactly. It's about what happened before the trial, something Julian did in his final days." 2 days later, he arrived at the bakery. He was young, maybe 30, with kind eyes and a notebook worn from use. He sat at the corner table, ordered coffee, and slid a USB drive across to me. "This was sent to our office anonymously a month ago. It's a recording, an audio file from a voice memo your husband made." My hands shook as I plugged it into my laptop. Julian's voice filled the room, steady, warm, familiar. "If anything happens to me, this is for Juliet. She deserves the truth." My breath caught. "Daniel and Michael have been acting strange. They think I don't notice, but I do. Someone's been transferring money from the business account. I've talked to Allison about it. She works for the insurance firm that handles our policy. She's been helping me track the fraud. If something goes wrong, she'll know what to do. I just want Juliet safe." I froze. Allison? She had helped him? Everything I believed, the affair, the betrayal, was a horrible misunderstanding built on a half-truth. She had fallen for him, yes, but he had been trying to protect me and our home. David watched me silently as I listened to Julian speak for the last time. Tell her I never stopped loving her. Tell her the truth was all I wanted. The recording ended with a click and a quiet breath that sounded like a sigh. I sat there in silence, hands pressed against my face. The grief I thought I had buried bloomed again, but this time it was gentle. "Not a storm, just rain. Why are you showing me this now?" I asked finally. David hesitated. "Because stories like yours don't end with verdicts. They end with truth." He was right. I wrote about it that night, about the fragility of understanding, about how love can be misread through the lens of pain. That story became the most shared piece I ever published. Readers from Canada, Australia, New York, and London sent letters saying, "This made me call my mother. This made me forgive." One evening as I was closing up the shop, David returned. He stood at the door awkwardly, a man uncertain of his welcome. "I'm writing a book," he said. "It's about your story, about how truth is never just one version. I'd like you to be a part of it." I laughed softly. "I think I've had enough of being a story." But he smiled. "Then let's make you the author this time." Months passed as we worked together, digging through letters, journals, court records. What emerged was not just a tale of betrayal and revenge, it was a chronicle of rebirth. When the book was finally published, its cover was simple, a photograph of the bakery window glowing at dusk. The title was his idea, After the Ashes. The launch was held at the local library. Rows of chairs, soft light, people waiting to hear me speak. As I stood at the podium, I looked out and saw faces I didn't recognize. But each of them carried something I did recognize: pain trying to heal. I read from the final page of the book. Sometimes we bury the truth because we fear its light. But the truth is the only thing that grows after fire. When I finished, there was silence, the kind that means people are feeling too much to speak. Then applause, soft at first, then rising like a wave. It wasn't fame that moved me. It was connection. For the first time in decades, my story belonged to others, not just to pain. Later that night, David drove me home. The road was quiet, lined with trees that shimmered under the moonlight. He asked, "Do you ever think you'll see your sons again?" I looked out the window. "I hope so," I said. "Not because I want to forgive them, because I want them to see that I survived." 3 weeks later, a letter arrived from the state prison. The warden was requesting permission for a recorded interview. My sons wanted to speak to me on camera for a rehabilitation program. I agreed. The day of the meeting, I walked through the gray corridor of the prison, each step echoing like a heartbeat. Daniel sat behind the glass first. He looked older now, his hair gray at the temples. He picked up the phone slowly. "Hi, Mom." I studied his face, the lines of regret, the eyes of a boy who had run out of time. "Hello, Daniel. I heard about your book," he said. "They let me read a copy. It was beautiful. I didn't deserve to be in it," I nodded. "You were part of the story, whether you liked it or not." He looked down. "I'm sorry, Mom, if Dad were here." His voice broke. "I just wish I could take it back." I leaned closer to the glass. "You can't undo what you did, Daniel. But you can live every day trying to be better than the man you were. That's all that's left." Then came Michael. He was trembling, his eyes red. "I dream about Dad," he said. He never says anything. He just looks at me, and I wake up screaming. I wanted to reach through the glass, to touch his hand, to say something motherly. But the glass was cold and real. "Maybe he's waiting for you to listen," I said. "Not to him, to yourself." He nodded, crying silently. When the guard called time, I stood up. "I forgive you," I said quietly. Both boys looked shocked. "Not because you deserve it," I continued. "Because I deserve peace." Driving home that evening, the sun was setting in long ribbons of gold and scarlet. I felt light, almost weightless. Forgiveness had cost me nothing and given me everything. When I reached home, the old clock on the wall ticked steadily. I sat by the window, watching the first stars appear. For the first time, I didn't feel haunted. I felt whole. I picked up a pen and wrote the opening line of my next story. Sometimes justice isn't found in courtrooms. It's found in forgiveness. Then I smiled, closed my notebook, and whispered to the night, "Julian." I kept my promise. I found the truth, and I found myself. The invitation arrived in a plain white envelope with no return address. I almost threw it away, thinking it was another piece of promotional mail, until I saw the letterhead, the State Justice Foundation. Inside was a single card. "You are invited to attend the premiere screening of After the Ashes, the Juliet Roberts story, a documentary by David Keane." For a long minute, I just stared at it. My own name looked unreal, like a stranger's printed life. The date was 3 weeks away. The location, Austin Courthouse Auditorium. The same building where I had once sat trembling while a judge read my son's sentences. When the night came, I wore a simple navy dress, the same one I had worn to my bakery's reopening. The auditorium smelled of polished wood and nervous anticipation. David was waiting near the entrance, smiling, holding a small bouquet of white lilies. "You ready?" he asked. "I've been ready for 40 years, I said. The film began in silence. Then came my voice, recorded months ago in his studio. Grief doesn't disappear. It changes its shape until you learn how to hold it without bleeding. Scenes of the bakery filled the screen. The sound of kneading dough, the old clock ticking, sunlight spilling through the window. Then photographs of Julian, Daniel, Michael, and Allison faded in one after another. The story unfolded. Betrayal, truth, forgiveness. People gasped when they saw the courtroom footage, the confession, the tragedy that followed. But it wasn't pity I felt in the room. It was reverence, the way strangers react when pain is turned into art. Halfway through, the lights dimmed lower and a new segment appeared, something I hadn't seen. David had secretly included an old home video he found in Julian's belongings. It showed the two of us dancing in our kitchen, decades ago. Julian was laughing, twirling me clumsily while Daniel, still a child, filmed from the doorway. My breath caught. The audience disappeared. It was just us again, young, foolish, happy. When the screen finally went black, there was a long silence, and then applause. Not polite, but raw, human. I saw people wiping their eyes. David leaned over. "They understand," he whispered. Afterward, a judge approached me, the same one who had presided over the case years ago. His hair was whiter, but his eyes were kind. "Mrs. Roberts," he said softly, "your story changed how I see sentencing. We now have a rehabilitation initiative for families like yours." That night, back at the bakery, I found a note slipped under the door. It was from Allison. "Juliet, I've moved to another state. I'm working with a support group for women recovering from toxic marriages. Julian once told me you were the strongest woman he knew. I believe him now. Thank you for saving me, even when you thought I was the enemy." I folded the note and placed it in a glass jar beside the register where customers often left kind words. Weeks passed. The documentary spread online, viewed by millions. People wrote from every continent, widows, sons, mothers, each one finding a reflection of themselves. The bakery became a sanctuary, not just for bread, but for broken hearts. Then, one bright morning, the phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. "Mrs. Roberts?" A formal voice said. "This is Warden Hughes from Crestview Correctional. I'm calling about Daniel Roberts." My chest tightened. "Yes?" "He's up for early release under the new program you helped inspire. He requested that you be present at his hearing." I hesitated, staring at the sunlight on the counter. Could I face him again, not through glass, but in person? After a long silence, I said, "Tell him I'll be there." The hearing was brief. Daniel looked smaller than I remembered, humbled by time. The judge asked if I wished to speak. I stepped forward. "Your Honor," I began, my voice steady, "forgiveness doesn't erase consequence, but it gives consequence meaning. My son has learned remorse. Let him finish learning compassion." The judge nodded. "Release granted." Daniel turned to me, eyes wet. "Mom, what now?" "Now?" I smiled faintly. "We bake." He came home that same evening. The bakery smelled of cinnamon and new beginnings. He rolled up his sleeves awkwardly, dusted the counter with flour, and said, "Teach me." I handed him the rolling pin. "We start with patience," I said. As the dough rose, so did something inside both of us, a quiet understanding that no sentence, no courtroom could define what remained of our family. Later, As we closed the shop, Daniel pointed to a customer reading the framed quote on the wall. It was the final line from my book. The fire took everything, except my ability to love. He looked at me. Dad would have liked that. Yes, I whispered. He would have. That night I walked home alone. The streetlights glowed amber, and the cool wind carried the faint sound of laughter from the cafe down the block. I looked up at the stars and thought about how small we all are, and how miraculous it is that stories, once whispered in pain, can travel so far. At my doorstep I turned the key, paused, and whispered into the quiet. Good night, Julian. And somewhere in the stillness of the house, the old clock ticked once, soft, certain, alive. The morning of my 73rd birthday was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels earned. I sat by the bakery window, sunlight spilling across the table, a cup of warm coffee between my hands. The clock on the wall ticked its steady rhythm, the same clock that had watched over my life through every heartbreak, every miracle. Daniel was in the kitchen, humming while the first batch of bread baked. He had grown softer now, not weaker, just gentler, like steel cooled after fire. When he turned and smiled at me, I saw Julian's eyes looking back, but this time without the shadow of guilt. Mom, he said, someone left another letter for you. It was a plain envelope, no return address, just my name in blue ink. Inside was a clipping from an international newspaper, an article about the Echoes of Emotion Foundation. It had begun as a small idea, a fund David and I created to help elderly women who'd been victims of financial or emotional abuse. Now, 3 years later, it had become a global initiative. Women from Canada, Australia, the United States, and even Europe wrote to say they finally felt seen. The article quoted one line from my old journal. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means choosing to live without needing an apology. I read it aloud, my voice trembling. Daniel leaned on the counter, smiling. You really did change people's lives, Mom. I shook my head. No, Daniel, they changed mine. In the afternoon, I walked to the cemetery with a basket of wildflowers. The path was lined with golden leaves whispering beneath my shoes. When I reached Julian's grave, I knelt and brushed away the fallen petals from his name. I forgive you, I whispered, as I always did. But I also thank you, because losing you gave me the courage to find myself. The wind stirred softly, almost like an answer. Back at home, I found David sitting at the porch steps, holding his notebook. I thought you might be writing again, he said. I smiled. I've been thinking of it. One last story, something for those who still feel trapped in the dark. He nodded. Then let's call it Lightkeepers. That evening, as the sun melted into gold across the rooftops, I began to write. Each word flowed like a confession, a prayer, a promise. I wrote about love, the kind that survives betrayal, about justice, the kind that doesn't need revenge, about peace, the kind you build, brick by brick, out of forgiveness. When I finished, I closed the notebook and looked around the quiet bakery. Every table, every chair, every loaf of bread told a story, and I realized I wasn't writing my ending. I was writing everyone's beginning. I walked to the window and watched the first stars flicker awake above the town. Their light looked fragile, but I knew better. Even the smallest star burns for millions of years, just like hope, so I whispered, half to the night and half to whoever would listen. If you've ever been broken, if you've ever been betrayed, remember, your story isn't over yet. The fire that tried to destroy you will one day be the light that guides someone else home. I smiled then, turned off the lights, and stepped outside. The bakery sign glowed softly in the dark. Echoes of Emotion. It wasn't just a name anymore. It was a heartbeat, mine, and everyone who had ever dared to heal. And as I walked into the quiet street, the voice that had once trembled with pain now carried strength, certainty, and calm. If this story touched you, if it reminded you of your own strength, or of someone who once stood up after losing everything, then don't let it fade here. Share this story. Leave a comment telling me where in the world you're listening from. And if you believe in second chances, hit that subscribe button, because every week I'll be here to remind you that your heart still has a story to tell. This is Echoes of Emotion, and every echo begins with you.